and that's the deadline, the U.S. government will go into default. Well, one person keeping a close watch on this is Congressman Bill Cassidy of Baton Rouge, who is joining us on the phone this morning from Washington. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Hey, JP. Hey, Whitney. How are y'all?
Hey, Bill, we're great. Thank you.
Hey, what's your feeling, Congressman? Are they going to reach some sort of compromise on this debt ceiling issue?
Well, eventually we will. It's just a question of what that compromise will be. The president really wants to raise taxes, whereas Republicans have continued to say we have a spending problem, not a revenue problem.
Late last night, the president came out. Washington Post reported that the president was talking about trimming back Social Security benefits. Have you heard anything more about that this morning? You know,
I've just seen the same article that you have seen. Clearly, the president, after having said we don't need to have entitlement reform, now understands that in order to save programs, we need to actually reform them. So I consider that progress, but I don't have more details as to what he would propose. I just don't.
Congressman, if you were in that meeting today at the White House with the president, what's the key point that you would make about this whole debt ceiling issue?
That the one way to approach this is by increasing revenue. Now, you can increase revenue with taxes, or you can increase revenue by other ways, including, for example, allowing more drilling off the Outer Continental Shelf. Last year was the first year that we have not held a lease sale for Outer Continental Shelf drilling, offshore drilling. There's revenue associated with that. We know in South Louisiana that if you unleash our oil and gas industry, we're going to create a lot of royalty payments. There's other ways to get out of this aside from just taxation.
Do you think closing some of the loopholes is another good way, Congressman?
Yeah, Republicans and Democrats, that's one area of common ground where we would lower the corporate income tax rate, which right now is higher than countries that compete with us, but you broaden the number of companies that are affected. So the net is that you are fairer to companies. You're less likely to force them offshore, but you also probably have increased revenue.
But you see some kind of compromise coming out that you don't see the country going into default.
Well, first, I'm not sure that we're going to make the August 2nd deadline. But there's two types of default. There's one where you just delay interest payment. That's called a technical default. And then there's another where you go bankrupt. The long-term threat is that we quote-unquote go bankrupt. The short-term threat of postponing interest payments, right now it doesn't seem that that's affecting the markets. If you look at T-bill rates, those have been very stable. So I think as long as we're getting our long-term fiscal house in order, that the markets will tolerate even a short-term postponement of interest payments.
On another issue, Congressman, that you've joined some other congressmen, especially from oil-producing states. You've written a letter to the president challenging his move to open the strategic, or to tap the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. What did you tell him in that letter? Well,
we're asking him to say, okay, wait a second, you're manipulating the markets by releasing oil from the SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. You acknowledge that supply is important, but on the other hand, you continue to discourage drilling in the Outer Continental Shelf. Now, we, of course, approach this one as a national energy issue, as a national security issue, but a jobs issue. We know the folks that work on those rigs make good money, good benefits, support their family, and if we could expand those numbers of jobs, that would help our unemployment, help our economy, and as we said earlier, actually create more revenue for the federal government without taxation.
Quickly, what reaction have you gotten from the White House about the letter that you sent?
So far, silence. On the other hand, it's part of a campaign, if you will. The American people objecting to expensive gasoline, the unemployment numbers staying unacceptably high, and then hopefully letters like this will move the president towards a more rational energy policy.
All right, Congressman Bill Cassidy joining us on the phone from Washington this morning. Thanks so much for bringing us up to date, and you know you're invited anytime to be right here on TuneIn.
We'd like to be back. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Congressman Cassidy, so much. And we'll be following more of what happens in Washington with today's big meeting coming up, and more on Good Morning America. But more on your forecast coming up with